On Christmas morning, my successful son visited and asked, "How do you like the mountain cabin I bought you?" "Mom, are you enjoying those monthly checks?" In complete shock, I whispered. "What cabin? What checks?" "I never received anything." My scheming daughter-in-law slowly approached with a satisfied smirk. "Follow this story to the end, and tell me which state you are reading from, so I can see how far this truth has traveled." I never imagined that a simple Christmas question would demolish everything I believed about my life. For 3 years, I had been struggling to survive on my part-time library assistant salary, splitting my arthritis medication in half to make it last longer, and wearing the same threadbare sweater through brutal Colorado winters. But I convinced myself these hardships were temporary, that circumstances would improve eventually. My son Michael had built something extraordinary from nothing. At 37, he owned a thriving construction company that employed over 150 workers throughout the Denver metro area. I felt proud of his accomplishments, even though our conversations had dwindled to brief phone calls about project deadlines and contract negotiations. After his father passed away 4 years ago, Michael buried himself in expanding his business, and I understood completely. People process grief differently, and work had always been his escape mechanism. The small apartment felt especially lonely that Christmas morning. I had spent hours preparing his favorite dishes, even though the grocery expenses would mean eating ramen noodles for the next 10 days. My tiny kitchen barely accommodated all the cooking, but I desperately wanted everything perfect for his rare visit. It had been nearly 6 months since I had seen him face to face. When Michael walked through my front door, I was struck by how prosperous everything appeared. His leather jacket, his designer boots, even his casual jeans probably cost more than my monthly rent payment for this cramped one-bedroom apartment. Behind him entered Amanda, his wife of 4 years. She wore an elegant emerald coat that belonged in a fashion magazine, her auburn hair professionally styled. Despite the December snow, the diamond earrings catching the light probably cost more than my annual income. "Mom, everything smells absolutely incredible," Michael said, embracing me briefly before stepping back to help Amanda remove her expensive coat. She smiled at me with that practiced expression she always displayed, but her green eyes seemed to be calculating something behind the warmth. We gathered around my small dining table, and I listened attentively as Michael discussed expanding his business into Fort Collins and Colorado Springs. Amanda contributed occasionally, mentioning their recent vacation to Tuscany and the extensive renovations they were planning for their Highlands Ranch mansion. I nodded enthusiastically, though each detail emphasized the growing chasm between my circumstances and theirs. Then, as I was serving homemade apple pie, Michael leaned back in his chair and smiled broadly. "Mom, I have been curious about something that has been on my mind recently." I set down the pie server, giving him my complete attention. "How are you enjoying the mountain cabin I purchased for you 3 years ago? I know you have always loved being surrounded by pine trees and mountain air." The words struck me like freezing water. I stared at him, my mouth slightly agape, struggling to comprehend what he had just said. Mountain cabin. I felt my pulse accelerate as confusion flooded through me. "What mountain cabin, honey? I never received any cabin from you." Michael's confident smile began faltering. He glanced uncertainly at Amanda, who had become very still beside him. "The cabin on Pine Ridge Lake. I had it transferred to your name for your 68th birthday 3 years ago. Don't you remember the paperwork?" I shook my head slowly, feeling increasingly dizzy. "Michael, I would absolutely remember receiving a cabin. I have never gotten anything like that from anyone. Are you certain you are not confusing me with someone else?" Amanda suddenly stood up, her cloth napkin falling to the floor. "Oh my goodness, I just remembered," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. "I need to return an urgent call about tomorrow's contractor meeting. Please excuse me for just a moment." She walked quickly toward my kitchen, pulling out her phone with movements that seemed wrong, somehow urgent in a way that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Michael was frowning deeply now, his business-minded brain clearly attempting to solve an impossible puzzle. "Mom, That is absolutely impossible. I specifically instructed my secretary to handle all the legal paperwork. The deed should have been mailed directly to your address, and there were supposed to be monthly support payments established as well. He continued. Monthly payments? I felt my knees weaken suddenly. What monthly payments are you referring to? The $2,000 I have been sending you every month to help with living expenses. My secretary assured me you were receiving everything properly. The room seemed to rotate dangerously. $2,000 monthly, for 3 years. That represented $72,000, enough to have transformed everything for me. Enough to afford proper medication, to live in a decent apartment, to never worry about choosing between groceries and utilities. I gripped the table edge firmly. Michael, I promise you, I haven't received any monthly payments whatsoever. I have been struggling to afford my arthritis medication. Last month, I chose between buying groceries and paying my heating bill. Michael's face went completely pale. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against my linoleum floor. That is absolutely impossible. I have documentation, bank records. Everything should be thoroughly documented. From the kitchen, I could hear Amanda's voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't distinguish her words. My hands began trembling as the full implications started settling over me like a suffocating blanket. Show me, I whispered. Show me the paperwork immediately. Michael was already retrieving his phone, scrolling through emails with increasing desperation. I have copies of everything at home. The deed transfer, the payment confirmations. Mom, if you haven't been receiving this money, then where has it been going? We both turned toward the kitchen simultaneously. Amanda's voice had stopped abruptly. The silence felt heavy, guilty, oppressive. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked toward the kitchen doorway. Amanda was standing with her back toward us, phone pressed against her ear. But she wasn't speaking anymore. When she heard our approaching footsteps, she spun around quickly, her face flushed with obvious anxiety. Everything all right? Michael asked, but his tone had changed completely. It was the voice he used during business negotiations, when he suspected someone wasn't being truthful. Amanda's smile looked strained and artificial. Of course, just confirming our dinner reservations for tomorrow evening, but I could see it clearly. Now the guilt written across her features, the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes directly, the nervous manner she was fidgeting with her wedding ring. Amanda, Michael said slowly, do you know anything about the Pine Ridge cabin paperwork? You helped coordinate several things with my secretary around that time frame. The silence that followed felt eternal. Amanda's mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no words emerged. In that moment, studying her face, I knew with absolute certainty. Somehow, in some way, she had stolen what was meant for me. The Christmas I had worked so hard to make perfect was about to become the day my family disintegrated completely. The silence in my cramped dining room stretched like a wire ready to snap. Amanda stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. Michael was staring at his wife with an expression I had never witnessed before, a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion that made my chest ache. Amanda, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Where is my mountain cabin? She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Michael and me like a trapped animal seeking escape. There must be some misunderstanding here. Perhaps the paperwork was misdirected, or maybe there was an error at the bank. But even as she spoke, I could see the deception forming in her eyes. After working as a library assistant for 22 years, helping patrons with research and dealing with people from every walk of life, I had developed an ability to read faces. You learn to recognize truth from fiction when you spend your days helping people find information they claim they need. Amanda was lying, and she wasn't particularly skilled at it. Michael pulled out his phone again. I am calling Rebecca, my secretary. She handled this entire transaction personally. No, wait, Amanda said quickly, stepping forward with obvious panic. Maybe we should discuss this privately first. Your mother has been under considerable stress, and I don't want to upset her further if this is simply a clerical mistake. I felt cold anger building in my chest like ice forming on a window. Upset me further. I had been living on crackers and canned soup for dinner most nights, while she wore designer clothes and took European vacations. But I kept my voice carefully controlled. Amanda, sweetheart, I think we are past worrying about upsetting me. I need to understand where my cabin is located. Michael was already dialing. Within moments, I heard a woman's voice on the other end. Rebecca, this is Michael. I need you to locate the paperwork for the mountain cabin I purchased for my mother 3 years ago. There was a brief pause, then Rebecca's voice became clearer as Michael activated the speaker function. Certainly, Mr. Thompson. The property at 2847 Pine Ridge Drive Ive. The deed was transferred to Dorothy Thompson on the 20th of December. 3 years ago, I have copies of all the signed documents in your file. My heart pounded violently. That was my name. My legal address for all correspondence. But I had never signed any documents related to mountain property. And the monthly support payments? Michael asked. With growing tension, all processed exactly as requested. $2,000 transferred on the 15th of every month to the account you specified. Account holder name Dorothy Thompson. Routing number ending in 7394. I felt the blood drain from my face completely. I don't have an account ending in 7394. My checking account ends in 2156. Michael's eyes snapped to Amanda with laser focus. Rebecca, can you read me the complete account number? As Rebecca recited the numbers, I watched Amanda's composed facade crumble piece by piece. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even remotely similar. Rebecca, Michael said, his voice dangerously quiet, who provided you with this banking information? Your wife, sir. Mrs. Thompson called me in January 3 years ago and explained there had been a change in your mother's banking situation. She provided the new routing and account numbers and requested that I update all the records immediately. The phone nearly slipped from Michael's hand. Amanda made a small, desperate sound in the back of her throat. And the deed, Michael continued relentlessly. Where was it supposed to be mailed? To the address Mrs. Thompson provided. Let me check here. 1455 Aspen Street. Unit 4C. I had never lived on Aspen Street. I had been in the same apartment for 8 years. Michael hung up the phone, and the silence that followed was deafening. When he looked at Amanda, his face was completely blank, which somehow seemed more terrifying than anger would have been. Explain, he said simply. Amanda's composure finally shattered completely. Tears began flowing down her cheeks, but they looked more like panic than genuine remorse. Michael, you have to understand. My sister was about to lose her house. She is a single mother with 3 children, and her ex-husband stopped paying child support. I just borrowed the money temporarily. Borrowed, I whispered. You mean stole? No, Amanda's voice rose defensively. I was going to repay everything. I just needed time to get my sister's situation stabilized. And the mountain cabin, Michael asked with deadly calm. I suppose it is not like my mother was using it. Amanda nodded miserably. My family needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet financially. It is not like you visit there anyway. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not like I was using it, Amanda. I have been working 25 hours a week, shelving books to afford my medication. I have been eating 1 meal a day to stretch my grocery budget. I haven't been able to turn my heat above 65 degrees because I cannot afford the electricity bill. Michael was staring at his wife like he had never seen her before. Amanda, my mother could have died. What if she had had a medical emergency and couldn't afford proper treatment? But she didn't, Amanda said desperately. She is fine. She is healthy. My sister has diabetes, and her children needed stability. They needed the money more urgently. The callousness of her words hit me like a physical blow. Fine, healthy? I thought about the nights I had lain awake, chest tight with anxiety, wondering how I had afford my next prescription refill. The times I would stood in the grocery store with a calculator, putting items back because I couldn't afford them. "Where is my cabin now?" I asked. My voice barely audible. Amanda wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her expensive makeup smearing. "My sister's family is living there, and my parents moved in last year when they retired. They have been making improvements, updating the kitchen and bathrooms." "With my money," Michael said flatly. Amanda nodded wretchedly. I sank into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted beyond measure. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that Michael was simply too busy with his successful business to check on me regularly. That his prosperity meant he didn't need to worry about his mother's welfare. I had been proud of his independence, even as I struggled alone with poverty and isolation. But all this time, he believed he was taking care of me properly. He thought I was comfortable and financially secure. "Mom," Michael said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am so incredibly sorry," I thought. "I thought you had everything you needed." I looked at my son, this successful man who had worked so hard to build a better life, and I saw the little boy who used to promise he would take care of me when he grew up. He had tried to keep that promise, but the woman he trusted most had stolen it from both of us. "How much?" I asked Amanda directly. "How much of my money did you steal?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "All of it," she finally whispered. $72,000, plus a mountain cabin that was probably worth at least $300,000 more. Amanda's family had been living like royalty on money that was meant to keep me from destitution. Michael stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "Amanda, pack your belongings. I want you out of my house tonight, Michael." "Please," she begged, reaching toward him. "We can fix this. I will make it right somehow. I will find a way to repay your mother everything." He stepped away from her touch. "With what money? You haven't worked a single day since we got married. Everything you have, everything your family has been living on, was stolen from my mother." I watched my daughter-in-law fall apart completely, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where trust used to exist. She had looked me in the eye for 3 years, had sat at this very table during previous visits, knowing I was struggling financially while her family lived in luxury at my expense. As Amanda's sobs echoed through my small dining room, I realized that this Christmas would indeed be unforgettable, but not because of the family gathering I had hoped for. It would be remembered as the day I learned that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones concealing the darkest secrets. After Amanda left that night, sobbing and pleading for forgiveness that neither Michael nor I could provide, my apartment felt different, quieter, but not peaceful. The silence was heavy, with unanswered questions and the weight of betrayal that seemed to settle into every corner like dust. Michael wanted to contact his attorney immediately, but I asked him to wait, not because I was reconsidering pursuing justice, but because something told me we needed to understand the complete scope of what Amanda had done before we moved forward. Thieves rarely steal just once, and I suspected this went much deeper than a cabin and some monthly payments. "Mom, you don't need to handle anything," Michael said as he sat across from me at my small kitchen table, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long, devastating day. "Let me take care of everything. You have suffered enough." But I shook my head firmly. For 3 years, I had been the victim of Amanda's lies. I had been helpless and unknowing, while she systematically robbed me of what little security I might have had. Now I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to sit passively and let others manage my affairs. "I need to see everything." I told him every document, every bank record, every piece of paperwork. "I need to understand exactly what she did to me." The next morning, after Michael went home to change clothes and collect documents, I called in sick to the library for the first time in 3 years. Mrs. Patterson, my supervisor, was surprised, but understanding when I explained I had a family emergency. If only she knew how accurate that description was. Michael returned with boxes of paperwork and his laptop computer. We spread everything across my small dining table. the same table where Amanda had sat just hours before, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law while hiding her crimes. The first document we examined was the deed to the mountain cabin. My signature was there, clear and legible, on a document I had never seen before. But as I studied it carefully, something seemed wrong. "This isn't how I sign my name," I said, pointing to the signature. "Look at the D in Dorothy. I always make it with a small flourish at the bottom. But this one is just a plain letter." Michael pulled out his phone and photographed the signature, then found an old birthday card I had signed for him the previous year. The differences were subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "She forged your signature," he said, his voice flat with controlled anger. We continued investigating. The bank records showed that the monthly payments had been going to an account that was indeed in my name, but at a bank I had never conducted business with. Someone had opened an account using my personal information without my knowledge or consent. "I need to see this account," I said with determination. Michael called the bank, but they wouldn't provide information over the phone since he wasn't an authorized user. So we drove there together, my hands shaking as I walked into the marble lobby of Rocky Mountain Federal Bank with my driver's license and social security card. The account had been opened 3 years and 2 months ago, just weeks before the first payment was supposed to reach me. The address on file was 1455 Aspen Street. Unit 4C, the same address Rebecca had mentioned. The phone number listed wasn't mine either. "Madam," the bank representative said, looking confused as she scrolled through the computer records. "You have never actually visited this branch before, have you?" "No," I said firmly. "I have never been in this building in my entire life." She showed us the signature card from when the account was opened, the same forged version of my name, signed by someone who wasn't me. "This is identity theft," the representative said, her voice filled with concern. "You need to file a police report immediately." But we weren't finished yet. Michael had brought copies of all his financial records related to my support, and as we sat in the bank's customer service area, a more complete picture began emerging. The monthly payments were just the beginning. Michael had also been sending additional money for my medical expenses, money I had never seen. $500 when he thought I needed new eyeglasses, $800 for what he believed was dental work, $1,500 last Christmas as a holiday bonus. Every single payment had gone to the fraudulent account. "How much total?" I asked. Though I was afraid to hear the answer, Michael's fingers moved across his phone's calculator application. His face went pale. $57,000. Over 3 years, she stole $57,000 from you. I felt dizzy. $57,000 was more money than I had ever possessed in my life. It was enough to have changed everything, to have given me security and comfort in my retirement years, instead of the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. We drove to 1455 Aspen Street. Next, it was a run-down apartment complex on the east side of Denver, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and cracked sidewalks. Unit 4C was empty, with a "for rent" sign taped to the window. She probably rented it just long enough to establish the false address, Michael said, his jaw tight with anger. But I was thinking about something else entirely. "Michael, how did she obtain my personal information? My social security number, my date of birth, all the details she had need to open that account?" He was quiet for a moment. "From our house, I keep copies of important family documents in my home office. She would have had access to everything." The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. Amanda hadn't simply seen an opportunity and taken it impulsively. She had planned this carefully and systematically, stealing my identity and my money while living in my son's house, eating at his table, pretending to love him. That evening, as we sat in my living room surrounded by evidence of Amanda's crimes, Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I am so sorry." I trusted her completely. "I never thought to verify that you were receiving the money because she was the one who suggested I send it in the first place." That detail hit me like ice water. "She suggested it?" Michael nodded miserably. About 8 months after Dad died, she mentioned how worried she was about you managing alone on your limited income. She said it would be a wonderful gesture if I could help with your expenses, especially since the business was doing so well. She even offered to coordinate with Rebecca to set everything up. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of Amanda's manipulation. She had positioned herself as the caring daughter-in-law, concerned about her husband's struggling mother, while secretly ensuring that every dollar meant for me would end up in her family's pockets. And the mountain cabin? Same thing. She said, you had mentioned wanting to live closer to nature, that it would be beneficial for your health and peace of mind. She helped me find the property, negotiated the purchase price, handled all the legal paperwork. Amanda had played my son like a master musician, using his love for me against both of us. She had made him feel generous and caring while systematically robbing me of everything he had tried to provide. As Michael gathered the papers to take to his attorney, I sat alone in my living room staring at walls I had grown familiar with over the past 3 years. This small, cramped space with its outdated furniture and broken air conditioning wasn't supposed to be my reality. I was supposed to be living comfortably in a beautiful cabin in the mountains, with enough money to buy my medications without counting every penny. Instead, Amanda's family was probably sitting by that lake right now, enjoying their stolen retirement, while I had been rationing my arthritis medication and wearing second-hand clothes from thrift stores. But knowing the truth, as painful as it was, felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. Amanda had stolen more than money from me. She had stolen 3 years of security, of dignity, of the peace of mind that comes with knowing your child is taking care of you properly. Tomorrow, we would begin the process of getting it all back. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I went to bed knowing exactly where I stood, financially and emotionally. And that knowledge, bitter as it was, felt like power. The morning Michael's attorney called with the results of his investigation. I was reorganizing returned books at the library, where I had worked part-time for the past 5 years. My knees ached against the hard floor, and my hands were sore from repetitive motions, but I kept working because I needed every dollar from this job. At least I thought I did. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Patterson's voice was grim when I returned his call during my lunch break. We need to meet immediately. What we have uncovered extends far beyond what we initially suspected. Michael picked me up after my shift, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had barely slept since Christmas, throwing himself into the investigation with the same intensity he brought to his construction projects. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and it was destroying him emotionally. At the attorney's office, we sat across from Mr. Patterson as he laid out a file thick with documents. Amanda didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Thompson. She has been operating what amounts to a sophisticated fraud scheme using your identity. The room seemed to tilt as he explained. Amanda had used my personal information to open not just the one bank account, but 4 separate accounts at different financial institutions. She had applied for credit cards in my name, taken out a personal loan, and even filed fraudulent tax returns, claiming me as a dependent while reporting income I had never earned. The IRS has been attempting to contact you about discrepancies in your tax filings, Mr. Patterson continued. They have been sending notices to the false address. You are currently under investigation for tax evasion. I felt like I was drowning tax evasion, but I have filed my taxes honestly every year. We understand that now, but the IRS doesn't. Amanda has been reporting that you received the money. Michael sent money that you never actually received. From their perspective, you have been concealing income. Michael's hands were clenched into fists on the conference table. How much did she steal in total? Mr. Patterson flipped through several pages, calculating figures, including the original $57,000, plus additional credit card spending, loan proceeds, and fraudulent tax refunds. We are looking at approximately $94,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $94,000. I made $22,000 a year shelving books and helping patrons find research materials. Amanda had stolen more than 4 years of my salary. And the mountain cabin, that is where the situation becomes more legally complex. Mr. Patterson said, "The property is legally in your name, Mrs. Thompson, based on the forged deed. Amanda's family has been living there, making improvements with the stolen money, and they have actually increased the property value significantly." I thought about Amanda's sister, whom I would met only once at their wedding. She had seemed like a struggling single mother, grateful for Amanda's support. Had she known where the money was coming from? Had she known she was living in a cabin stolen from her brother-in-law's mother? "Can we recover it?" Michael asked. "Yes. But we will need to involve law enforcement. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Amanda could face substantial prison time." I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who had sat at my table just days ago, crying and begging for forgiveness. She had seemed genuinely remorseful, but now I wondered if those tears had been real or just another performance. What about her family? Her sister with the children? Her elderly parents? Mr. Patterson's expression was sympathetic but firm. "They will have to vacate the property immediately. If they can prove they didn't know the money was stolen, they might avoid criminal charges, but they cannot keep what was purchased with fraudulent funds." Michael was staring out the window, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Where is Amanda now?" "She is staying with her sister at the mountain cabin," Mr. Patterson said. "Our investigator confirmed she has been there since she left your apartment on Christmas night." "So she ran straight to the people who had been living off my mother's stolen money," Michael said bitterly. "Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Pine Ridge Lake. I had never seen the cabin that was supposedly mine, and as we pulled into the long gravel driveway, I gasped, despite myself. It was magnificent, a sprawling log structure, with enormous windows overlooking the water, surrounded by towering pine trees and professionally landscaped gardens. This was what Michael had intended for me, this peaceful, comfortable place where I could have spent my retirement years watching eagles soar over the mountains instead of worrying about whether I could afford my next prescription. Amanda's sister answered the door, her face falling when she saw Michael and me standing there. "Oh," she said quietly. "We have been expecting you." Amanda appeared behind her, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and an old sweater, and her face was puffy from crying. "Dorothy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am so sorry." I looked at her, this woman who had smiled at me across countless dinner tables while systematically destroying my financial security, and I felt nothing but cold anger. "Are you?" I asked. "Are you truly sorry, Amanda? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" She started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I had seen her tears before, had believed in them, had even felt sympathy for her sometimes, when Michael worked late and she seemed lonely. "I never intended for it to go this far," she sobbed. "It started with just borrowing the first payment to help my sister with her mortgage. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed. But you didn't," Michael said, his voice like ice. "You took more and more. You stole my mother's identity, filed false tax returns, opened credit cards in her name. That is not borrowing, Amanda. That is systematic fraud." Amanda's sister had appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "We didn't know," she said desperately. "We thought Michael was just being generous, helping us through a difficult period. Amanda told us he had insisted on buying us the cabin." I looked at this younger woman, probably close to my age, and I saw genuine shock and horror in her eyes. She hadn't known. None of them had known except Amanda. "The IRS believes I am a tax cheat because of what your sister did," I said quietly. "I could face prison time because Amanda filed false returns in my name." Amanda's sister gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God, Amanda, what have you done?" But Amanda just kept crying, offering excuses and apologies that meant nothing now. She had had 3 years to confess, 3 years to make this right, and she had chosen to dig deeper instead. Mr. Patterson stepped forward with his briefcase full of legal documents. "Mrs. Stevens, I am going to need you and your family to vacate this property within 30 days. Everything purchased with the fraudulent funds will need to be returned or compensated for. As I watched Amanda's family absorb the reality of their situation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, not satisfaction, not revenge, just relief that the truth was finally exposed. The police will be here tomorrow to arrest Amanda, Mr. Patterson continued. I would recommend she turn herself in voluntarily. Amanda looked up at Michael with desperate eyes. Please don't let them arrest me. I will repay everything. I promise. I will find work. I will work day and night to make this right. Michael shook his head sadly. With what skills, Amanda? You have never worked a day in your life. You have never even tried to work. All you know how to do is take from others. As we left the mountain cabin, I turned back for one final look at the place that should have been my home for the past 3 years. Soon it would be. But it felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge of how Amanda had stolen it from me. Mom, Michael said as we drove away, I am going to make sure you never want for anything again. I am going to take care of you the way I should have been doing all along. I patted his hand gently. You were taking care of me, honey. It is not your fault that Amanda stole what you provided. But as we drove back toward my cramped apartment, I knew that everything was about to change dramatically. Amanda would face the consequences of her crimes, and I would finally receive the security and comfort that Michael had always intended for me to have. The confrontation was over. Now came justice. The divorce papers were finalized on a rainy Tuesday in March, 4 months after that devastating Christmas dinner. I sat in the courthouse hallway beside Michael as his attorney emerged from the courtroom with news that Amanda had signed everything without contest. She had already been sentenced to 22 months in federal prison for fraud and identity theft, and fighting the divorce would have only added legal fees she couldn't afford. It is finished, Mr. Patterson said, settling down beside us. The marriage is dissolved. All assets purchased with stolen funds revert to their rightful owners. Mrs. Thompson, you now legally own the mountain cabin, and all the money in the fraudulent accounts has been frozen pending complete restitution. Michael let out a long breath. What about her family? They vacated the property last week. Her sister moved back to Kansas to live with relatives, and her parents found a small apartment in Lakewood. They have been surprisingly cooperative throughout this process. I believe they are genuinely horrified by what Amanda did. I felt a complex mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally ending, but sadness for the collateral damage. Amanda's family were innocent victims too, in their own way. They had lost their home and their financial stability, all because their daughter and sister had chosen to steal instead of asking for honest help. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork and life adjustments. Michael threw himself into making things right with the same intensity he had once brought to building his construction business. He hired a team of accountants to untangle Amanda's fraudulent tax filings, worked directly with the IRS to clear my name, and personally supervised every detail of transferring ownership of the mountain cabin back to me legally. But the most important change was in Michael himself. The successful businessman who had been too busy for regular phone calls became a son who visited every few days, who called just to check on my well-being, who insisted on accompanying me to medical appointments and grocery shopping. You don't have to hover around me, honey, I told him one afternoon as he helped me pack the few belongings I wanted to keep from my cramped apartment. I am not going anywhere. He paused in folding one of my quilts, his hands stilling on the soft fabric. Mom, I missed 3 years of your life because I was foolish enough to trust Amanda completely. I am not missing any more time. I understood his guilt, even though I didn't think he deserved it. Amanda had been a master manipulator, using his love for me to hide her crimes. But I also understood that trust, once broken so completely, takes time to rebuild even trust in yourself. Moving into the mountain cabin felt surreal. The place was beautiful, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Amanda's family had taken excellent care of it. I had to admit, the gardens were well maintained. The house was spotless and updated, and they had even added a deck overlooking the lake that I fell in love with immediately. But it felt like moving into someone else's life rather than reclaiming my own. "We can change anything you want," Michael said as we walked through the rooms together. "New furniture, different paint colors, whatever would make it feel like home to you." I appreciated his thoughtfulness, but I wasn't sure new curtains would erase the knowledge that Amanda's sister had slept in this bedroom for 3 years, reading bedtime stories to her children while I had been rationing my medication 50 miles away. The financial restitution process was more complex than I had expected. The accounts Amanda had opened in my name contained not just the money Michael had sent, but also funds from the credit cards she had used and the loans she had taken out. Untangling what belonged to whom required forensic accounting and months of documentation. The encouraging news, my new financial advisor explained, is that when everything is resolved, you will have not just the original money your son sent, but also accumulated interest and additional compensation for the identity theft. We are looking at approximately $112,000 once everything is recovered. $112,000. I had never imagined possessing that kind of money. It was enough to live comfortably for years, to never worry about choosing between groceries and medication again, to actually enjoy my retirement instead of working until my body gave out. But the money felt strange in my hands, tainted by the knowledge of how it had been stolen and recovered. I found myself almost missing the simplicity of my old life, where I knew exactly where I stood financially, even if that position was barely getting by. The most difficult part was dealing with the community's reaction. In a city the size of Denver, Amanda's arrest and trial had been reported in the local newspapers. Everyone in my library knew what she had done, and by extension, everyone knew that I had been the victim of an elaborate fraud scheme. People's reactions varied wildly. Some were sympathetic, offering help and expressing outrage on my behalf. Others seemed almost suspicious, as if they couldn't believe I hadn't known what was happening. A few made comments that suggested they thought I should be grateful for the attention, as if being defrauded was somehow better than being ignored. The worst were the people who acted like I had won the lottery, instead of having my identity stolen. Well, at least everything worked out in the end. One library patron said cheerfully, "Now you are living like a queen up in those mountains." I wanted to shake them, to explain that having your daughter-in-law systematically steal your identity and rob you for 3 years isn't something that just works out, that the money and the cabin came with the knowledge that someone you had trusted had viewed you as nothing more than a source of funds to exploit. But I kept my thoughts to myself and focused on rebuilding my life. The first night I spent alone in the mountain cabin, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over Pine Ridge Lake. The view was breathtaking, peaceful in a way I had never experienced before. But I felt oddly detached from it, as if I were a guest in someone else's dream. My phone rang, and Michael's name appeared on the screen. He had been calling every night since I had moved in, checking to make sure I was settling in comfortably. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I looked out at the lake, trying to find words for the complicated mix of emotions churning inside me. "Grateful," I said finally, "and sad, and angry, and confused sometimes all at the same time." "That sounds about right," Michael said softly. "You know, I have been thinking about what Amanda said that last day, about how she never intended for it to go so far." I remembered her tears, her desperate apologies. What about it? I think she was telling the truth about that part. I think she really did start small, and then couldn't stop, but that doesn't make it better. Does it? If anything, it makes it worse. She had dozens of opportunities to confess, to make it right, and she chose to dig deeper every single time. He was absolutely right. Amanda's initial crime might have been impulse or desperation, but everything that followed had been calculated deception. She had looked me in the eye at family dinners, had hugged me at holidays, had listened to me worry about money, all while knowing she was the reason I was struggling. "I keep thinking about how proud she seemed," I said, when she talked about her family's improvements to the cabin, the renovations they were making. She was proud of what they had accomplished with my stolen money. "She wasn't just stealing from you, Mom. She was stealing from both of us. She stole the relationship we should have had these past 3 years. The peace of mind I thought I was giving you. After I hung up with Michael, I walked through the house that was finally, legally, undeniably mine. It was beautiful, comfortable, everything I could have wanted, but it would take time before it felt like home instead of evidence of a crime. I settled into the master bedroom that night, in a bed that was mine, in a house that was mine, with enough money in the bank to last me the rest of my life. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted. But as I drifted off to sleep to the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore, I realized that exhaustion wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was the exhaustion that comes after a long, difficult journey is finally complete. Tomorrow, I could begin the work of making this stolen dream into something that truly belonged to me. 2 years later, I stood on the same deck where I had spent that first confused night, but everything had changed. The space that had once felt foreign now embraced me like a comfortable blanket. I had replaced Amanda's family's furniture with pieces that spoke to my soul, added plants that I had chosen myself, and hung photographs that told the story of my real life rather than someone else's stolen dream. The morning routine I had developed had become sacred to me. Coffee on the deck as the sun rose over the mountains, watching the lake change colors with the light. It was a luxury I had never imagined I had possessed this peace. This time to simply exist without the constant weight of financial worry. Michael's truck pulled into the driveway, right on schedule for our weekly breakfast together. This tradition had started months ago, after his initial guilt-driven hovering had settled into something more natural and comfortable. We would both learn to navigate this new relationship, one built on honesty rather than the false foundation Amanda had created. "Morning, Mom," he called as he came through the front door, carrying a bag from the bakery in town. "I brought those blueberry muffins you mentioned liking." I smiled, setting 2 plates on the kitchen table. "You don't have to bring me pastries every week, honey. I am perfectly capable of feeding myself now," he grinned. "I know you are, but I enjoy bringing them. Besides, Mrs. Rodriguez at the bakery always asks about you. Half the neighborhood has adopted you as their favorite success story." It was true. The same community that had whispered about my situation during Amanda's trial had embraced me once justice was served. People stopped me at the grocery store to ask how I was settling in. Neighbors brought casseroles when I first moved to the lake, and the postal worker made sure to mention whenever he had good news to deliver. "Any word from the lawyer about Amanda's parole hearing?" I asked, as we settled into our usual spots at the table. Michael shook his head. "Her attorney filed the paperwork, but Mr. Patterson says it is mostly a formality. The evidence was too overwhelming, and she pleaded guilty to everything. She will serve her complete sentence." 22 months had seemed like such a short time when the judge announced it. But as the seasons changed and my new life took shape, I had stopped thinking about Amanda's timeline and started focusing on my own. "How do you feel about that?" Michael asked, studying my face carefully. I considered the question seriously. A year ago, I might have wanted Amanda to suffer more, to face consequences that matched the scale of what she had stolen from me. But now, sitting in the cabin that was truly mine, with money in the bank and my son's genuine attention, revenge felt less important than it once had. "I feel like she is where she needs to be," I said finally. "Not because I want her to suffer, but because she needs to face real consequences for what she did. Maybe prison will teach her something that our family never could." Through the legal process, I had learned more about Amanda's psychology than I had ever wanted to know. She had grown up in a family that struggled financially, always comparing themselves to others who had more. When she married Michael, she had suddenly had access to wealth she had never imagined. But apparently, it hadn't been enough. She had needed to feel like she was the provider, the one who could solve her family's problems. The therapist her lawyer recommended says she has something called narcissistic entitlement disorder. Michael had told me months ago. She genuinely believed she deserved whatever she could take because life had been unfair to her. I had thought about that explanation for a long time. Life had been unfair to me too. when I had lost my husband and found myself struggling to make ends meet on a library assistant's salary, but I had never considered that unfairness gave me the right to steal from others. "Have you heard anything about her family?" I asked. Michael nodded. "Her sister found work in Kansas and seems to be doing well. Her parents are managing in their small apartment. They are starting over." Basically, I felt a pang of sympathy for them. Amanda's crimes had destroyed more lives than just mine. Her parents had lost their retirement security. Her sister's children had been uprooted from their schools and friends, all because Amanda had chosen theft over honesty. "I have been thinking about writing them a letter," I said. Michael's eyebrows rose. "Really? What would you say? That I don't blame them for what Amanda did? That I hope they are rebuilding successfully?" I paused, stirring cream into my coffee. Amanda made her choices, but they didn't deserve to pay for them. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at the lake. A family of deer had begun visiting the property regularly, and I had gotten into the habit of leaving apple cores for them near the edge of the forest. Simple pleasures that I had never had time for when every moment was consumed with financial survival. "I have something to tell you," Michael said. Eventually, his tone shifting to something more serious. I looked at him expectantly. "I have been seeing someone, a woman I met at a construction industry conference. Her name is Sarah, and she is completely different from Amanda." I felt a flutter of anxiety, then forced myself to relax. "Tell me about her." "She is a project manager for an environmental consulting firm. She helps companies navigate EPA regulations and cleanup requirements. She knows what Amanda did, knows the complete story, and she is not interested in my money. She earns excellent money herself." I smiled. "An environmental consultant? That seems appropriate somehow." Michael laughed. "I thought you would appreciate the irony. She is also incredibly honest, sometimes brutally so. She told me on our 4th date that she thought I was too trusting and needed to develop better boundaries. Smart woman? When do I get to meet her?" "Only if you want to. I am not rushing anything this time. I am learning to trust my own judgment again, and part of that means not seeking everyone else's approval before I know how I feel myself." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I am proud of you for taking your time, but when you are ready, I would love to meet her." After Michael left, I took my usual walk around the property. The gardens that Amanda's family had planted were thriving under my care, but I had added my own touches. A vegetable patch where I grew tomatoes and herbs, a reading nook under the old pine tree, a bird feeder that attracted mountain chickadees and Steller's jays. The cabin was becoming mine in ways that had nothing to do with legal ownership. It was filled with my choices, my memories, my quiet daily routines that no one could steal or forge or manipulate. That afternoon, I did something I had been planning for weeks. I called my old supervisor at the library. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Dorothy Thompson. I wanted to let you know that I will not be returning to work." There was a pause. "Are you feeling all right, Dorothy? You have been out quite a while now." "I am feeling better than I have in years," I said, smiling at the truth of it. "I am retiring." It felt strange to say the word. I had never imagined I would be able to retire, had assumed I would work until my body gave out. But the money Amanda had stolen, and that had been recovered, combined with the cabin and Michael's ongoing support, meant I could finally stop shelving other people's books and start living for myself. That evening, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Sarah wants to know if you like Mexican food. She is thinking of cooking for you next weekend." I typed back, "Tell her I love Mexican food, but she doesn't need to impress me. I already like anyone who makes my son happy." As darkness settled over the water, I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago. Tired, struggling, proud, but quietly desperate. She would never have believed that this peace was possible. This sense of security and contentment. Amanda had stolen 3 years of my life. But in a strange way, her crimes had also given me something I might never have had otherwise. They had forced Michael to truly see me, to understand that I needed more than just financial support. I needed his presence, his attention, his genuine care. They would also taught me something about my own strength. I had survived the theft, the investigation, the trial, the complicated process of reclaiming my identity and my life. I had learned that I was tougher than I had given myself credit for, more resilient than I had ever needed to be before. I would also learn something about forgiveness. Not forgiveness for Amanda, who would have to earn that through genuine change that I might never witness, but forgiveness for myself for being trusting enough to believe in her lies, and forgiveness for Michael, who had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had been. As I locked up the cabin and headed to bed, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a day well lived and a life reclaimed. Tomorrow would bring new small pleasures, new quiet joys, new moments of peace that no one could steal. The mountain cabin that had started as Amanda's crime scene had become my sanctuary. The money that had been stolen and recovered had become my security. The son who had been deceived into neglecting me had become my devoted companion. Amanda had tried to steal my future, but in the end she had only delayed it. Now it was mine, fully and completely, to live exactly as I chose, and I chose peace. Now, I am curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and tell me which state you are reading from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. Thank you for following this journey until the end.